Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Baker Institute this evening for this very special event. It's my genuine pleasure and distinct honor to introduce this evening's speaker. As some of you know, the Baker Institute Energy Forum has recently embarked on an ambitious 2-year research program on the role of the national oil companies in international energy markets. Despite some fitful movement towards privatization, especially in Europe and in Latin America, state-owned companies continue to play a central role, to say the least, in international oil and gas markets. Given their lion's share of global energy reserves, the influence of these national firms on oil markets and geopolitics is likely to expand in the decades to come. The national oil companies have become so important today that we Americans, Mr. Jum'ah, we always have acronyms for everything. We now call them NOCs in order to, because the phrase is used so much. So NOCs have become a central focus. Our Energy Forum, under the direction of our Baker Institute fellow Amy Jaffe, has assembled an international team of scholars and experts to investigate the full range of economic and political issues that will shape the future of national oil companies. As a central part of this research program, the forum will be inviting select government officials and corporate executives to speak on the subject here at the Institute and to help us all understand the important responsibilities and strategies of the national oil companies. We thank our Energy Forum sponsors, many of whom are here, for their generous support in making this program possible. It is only appropriate that tonight's speaker inaugurate our distinguished leader lecture series on the subject. We are truly beginning at the top. The company that he heads, Saudi Aramco, is the world's largest oil company, dwarfing all competitors, public and private, in oil production and estimated reserves. Saudi Aramco, as the national oil company of Saudi Arabia, has for decades served as the world's swing supplier, dominant member of OPEC, and strategic partner of the United States. The U.S.-Saudi relationship goes back its historic origins at the time of FDR and King Abdallah S. U.S. oil and gas companies and analysts are concluding that energy demand will outstrip supply quickly, and only the NOCs will have the resources to fill the gap. Not so much the IOCs, and it's basically an access issue. Our speaker's lecture could not be timelier. The dramatic rise in oil prices over the last several years has placed international oil markets in the public spotlight once again. The subject is a contentious, even emotional one. The factors that are driving today's oil markets are complex. They include rising Asian and U.S. demand, political uncertainty in the Persian Gulf, and OPEC production policy. The role of Saudi Arabia in oil markets has also come under closer scrutiny. Both Riyadh and Washington remain firmly committed to the United States-Saudi special relationship. But rising energy prices have led to a renewed focus on the ability of national oil companies to generate the huge amount of investment, several $1 trillion over the next 20 years, that will be necessary to meet global demand for oil and gas. It is hard to imagine a speaker better qualified to address such issues. He boasts a truly impressive range of experience in all facets of the energy industry. There are few who know as much about the ins and outs of the oil industry as tonight's guest. Born in Saudi Arabia's eastern province, not far from Dhahran, headquarters of Saudi Aramco, our speaker has received his education at the American University of Cairo, the American University of Beirut, two outstanding historic institutions in the Middle East that have produced many of the leaders of the Middle East, and a little-known university here in the United States called Harvard. And we will forgive you for having gone to Harvard. After joining Saudi Aramco in 1968, he rose rapidly to positions of high responsibility, including Vice President for Power Systems, Senior Vice President for Industrial Relations, and Executive Vice President for International Operations. In 1994, our speaker became a member of Saudi Aramco's board of directors. 1 year later, he was named the company's president and Chief Operating Officer. One thing about Saudi Aramco, they know how to spot talent. Since assuming the helm of Saudi Aramco, our speaker has overseen a historic expansion of the company's downstream and gas businesses and its transformation into a fully integrated international energy enterprise. And he has played a crucial part in balancing the company's commercial interests, Saudi Arabia's traditional leading role in international markets, and the development of the kingdom's domestic economy. He is, without exaggeration, one of the most important and respected figures in the world of oil and gas today, and has taken up the great service to his country in dispelling confusion about the kingdom's oil industry and its future strategies and capabilities. His presence here tonight, this evening, is a true honor and a great opportunity for us to hear his presentation on Saudi Arabia and the United States, partners with prosperity, the energy dimension. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my privilege to introduce the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Saudi Arabian Oil Company, Abdallah Jum'ah. Thank you. Pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. It's a pleasure to be with you today and to have an opportunity once again to visit my friends at the James Baker Institute for Public Policy and indeed throughout Rice University. This institute is doing outstanding work on energy issues, and I applaud their efforts. And I thank them for their warm hospitality. And as always, it's good to be back to this city. I am an honorary citizen of Houston, and I proudly hold a key to this city. I also am very proud to be in the Lone Star State, as many of my wonderful friends here call their wonderful state as the center of the known universe. The petroleum industry, of course, has deep roots in Houston, and many of my colleagues in Saudi Aramco have lived and worked and studied here in Texas over the years. Of course, this institute itself is dedicated to the study and thoughtful analysis of the key issues facing policymakers around the world. And I believe that energy ranks among the most important of those concerns. So when it comes to my topic, the diverse, mutually dependent, and mutually beneficial ties that bind Saudi Arabia and Saudi Aramco with the United States of America, there is absolutely no better forum for discussion than today's venue. Our two countries have been doing important business together for some 7 decades. And that relationship stands as a paragon of partnership. The strength of that relationship was confirmed, and indeed our firm bonds made even stronger by last month's meeting between President George W. Bush and His Royal Highness Crown Prince Abdallah, just up the road at Crawford. I'm proud to say that Saudi Aramco has been at the center of this relationship ever since that day in 1933, when the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and Standard Oil of California, predecessor to Chevron, signed a concession agreement which paved the way for the discovery of oil in the Kingdom and the subsequent development of our nation's petroleum industry. For many decades thereafter, Aramco was a partnership among 4 major American oil companies which worked closely with the Saudi government to achieve and maintain the Kingdom's leadership position in petroleum production. those companies and the tens of thousands of Americans who have worked at Aramco made tremendous contributions to our country and its prosperity. Of course, the partnership between our two nations extends well beyond oil into other vital areas such as commercial trade, international diplomacy, defense cooperation, and higher education. Perhaps the most important are the people-to-people friendship that have developed over the years. This multifaceted relationship has withstood the test of times, as well as the tragic events of 9/11 and their aftermath. Over the decades, this partnership has served to benefit both our countries and our societies. Indeed, these trade investments and people-to-people contacts are so important that I would like to take a few moments to examine these aspects of our relationship before moving into our discussion of oil. Saudi Arabia remains one of America's largest trading partners in the Middle East. And US brands are well established and well respected in the kingdom. Aside from consumer goods, high-tech tools, and heavy equipment, the kingdom values the work of the many American engineering, construction, financial, and consulting firms active in Saudi Arabia, as well as the benefits these companies have provided through the transfer of technology. Today, some 35,000 US citizens live and work in the kingdom. This is one of the largest overseas communities of Americans anywhere in the world. And to put this in perspective, this is roughly the population of Texarkana. They are only the latest in a long line of American men and women to make their homes in the kingdom, and whether they are earth scientists or research scientists, doctors or drillers, teachers or technicians, we appreciate the contributions of these men and women. Even given the history, the long history of engagement of American firms in the kingdom's economy, I think the best days of our economic partnership still lie ahead of us. There are a wide range of profitable investment opportunities in the kingdom available to American companies, whether Fortune 500 or small and medium-sized enterprises. And over the next 2 decades, our country's infrastructure investment alone are estimated at some $700 billion, including major projects in the fields of telecommunication, power generation, and water desalination. There are further opportunities on offer in refining, petrochemical, and natural gas, in addition to the engineering, construction, and service industries supporting those sectors. As the kingdom's economy continues to develop and diversify, there will be even larger and more lucrative opportunities available to US firms. And I believe that American companies have a major role to play in that ongoing economic expansion, just as they have for the last 70 years. Closer to home, there is another set of organizations whose influence on Saudis and Saudi Arabia has been every bit as intense as the oil majors or the big engineering and project management firms. I speak, of course, of universities and other institutions of higher learning. Many Saudis who now occupy major positions in either the public or the private sector earned their degree from American universities, as have many of our nation's leading professionals. At Saudi Aramco, currently, we have over 3,500 Saudi employees who hold at least one degree from an American university, and many have been awarded both bachelor's and postgraduate diplomas from American colleges. And here, at the ground of one of your country's most distinguished and most beautiful universities, I need hardly tell you what a broad-ranging positive effect such an education has on individuals, their families, their companies, and their communities. Multiply that effect over the tens of thousands of Saudi graduates of US universities, and I believe you will begin to understand the high value which we continue to place on these educational opportunities. But as the kingdom depends on the experience and expertise of American companies, institutions, and individuals for the development of its oil sector and other industries, the United States has come to rely on the kingdom for much of its energy, the lifeblood of the US economy, which contributes to the American way of life. There are some observers who have decried this dependence and questioned, first, the continued need for the strategic reliance on Saudi petroleum, and secondly, the reliability of that supply. And I believe it won't surprise any of you in this audience to learn that I wholeheartedly disagree with that view. Instead, I believe that the safest and strongest guarantee of American energy future lies in Saudi Arabia's unmatched reserve base and Saudi Aramco's extensive petroleum production, processing, and distribution infrastructure. And to demonstrate that my conviction is well grounded in fact rather than emotion, let me pose a few questions. First, where is demand for oil in this country headed? According to the US Department of Energy, Energy Information Administration, the EIA, US demand for oil will grow from about 20.6 million barrels per day last year to almost 28 million barrels per day in 2025. During the same 20-year period, domestic crude oil production in the States will decline by nearly 1 million barrels per day. This, of course, prompts the next question. Where will the US turn in order to compensate for this increasing energy deficit? Once again, let's look at the US government's analysis. The EIA predicts that in the next 20 years, Saudi oil production capacity will need to grow from its present level of roughly 11 million barrels per day to over 23 million barrels per day in order to meet a growing demand in the US and elsewhere around the world. Frankly, at this point, it is difficult to say with any certainty whether this forecast call on Saudi Arabian crude will actually materialize. Nevertheless, the kingdom is uniquely positioned because of its reserve and resources to consider raising its production by such a margin. Nevertheless, some commentators have argued that diversification is a feasible substitute for Saudi oil, and that increased production from a range of other countries could significantly reduce the United States' dependence on oil from the Arabian Gulf. It's true that potential exists for considerable expansion in future oil production capacity in regions like the Middle East, North and South America, and the various states of the former Soviet Union, including Russia. However, upon closer inspection, it's clear that each of these potential suppliers faces one or more serious challenges or constraints in significantly boosting its production its crude production level. For some, it's a question of political stability or the investment climate. Others face problems related to infrastructure and logistics, while still others possess relatively limited conventional oil reserves, thus constraining their ability to rapidly expand production. Even assuming that such issues could be overcome, the combined potential of the world's major producers is not expected to match the future production potential of Saudi Arabia alone. Therefore, diversification represents at best a complement to Saudi oil supplies rather than a feasible substitute for them. Then perhaps we should be looking beyond petroleum, to borrow the catchphrase of one of my industry colleagues. With the significant efforts and programs being made to advance alternative energy, can alternatives meet a larger percentage of energy needs in the coming decades? The EIA forecasts that the proportion of fossil fuels in the global energy mix will actually rise from 85.5% in 2001 to 87% by 2025. At the same time, the share of nuclear and other sources, including renewables, is forecast to fall from 14.5% to 13%. Technologies such as hydrogen and fuel cell don't even register during this period. While the promise of alternatives is immense, so are the technical, economic, and logistical hurdles they face. As a result, the National Academy of Sciences here in the United States has concluded that, and I quote, "In the best case scenario, the transition to a hydrogen economy would take many decades, and any reduction in oil imports are likely to be minor during the next 25 years. End of quote. Therefore, realistically speaking, hydrocarbons will continue to remain America's primary energy source for the foreseeable future. Alternatives will be needed in the future, and one day they will eventually make a more substantial contribution to the global energy mix. But that day lies many, many decades from now. In the meantime, we should work to improve the energy efficiency and environmental performance of mainstream gasoline and diesel engines and expand use of hybrids and other bridge technologies, even as research on hydrogen fuel cells continues. Such an approach has the twin merits of being both responsible and realistic, and offers greater benefits in terms of environmental protection. Therefore, we find ourselves once again reliant upon Saudi oil. Now, let me pose another question of the $64,000 variety. Can Saudi Arabia and Saudi Aramco step up and deliver? It's a fair question, given what's at stake, and a question I can easily answer with an emphatic yes. The first key to our ability to provide energy to the world lies with our massive reserves of crude oil, which we divide into three broad categories. The first is proven reserves, some 260 billion barrels, accounting for a quarter of the entire world's proven oil reserves. The second category includes our probable and possible reserves, which are conservatively estimated at another 100 billion barrels. In fact, by continuing to turn probable reserves into proven barrels, we have been able to replace our production for many years, despite being one of the world's largest producers of crude oil. Lastly, there are the yet-to-be-discovered resources. We estimate their in-place volume at some 200 billion barrels. And these resources are likely to be located in the vast areas of the kingdom that have yet to be adequately explored. To find and prove these reserves, we are currently pursuing an aggressive exploration program. Second are the activities that bring those barrels from underground to the market. We have adopted a long-range view of our reservoir management strategies in order to maximize the ultimate recovery from our fields. In fact, our reservoir management teams aren't looking at what we will be producing over the next decade or two, but rather at our production strategies 50 years from now. We view ourselves as stewards of these precious resources, not only for the good of the kingdom, but for the benefit of countries, communities, and consumers around the globe, now and in the future. To bring those barrels to the market, we operate one of the most sophisticated and reliable petroleum production, processing, and transportation infrastructure on the planet. We are working diligently to expand Saudi Aramco's production capacity to 12 million barrels per day, with scenarios to bolster this to even 15 million barrels per day, consistent with the growth in world oil demand. The increase in the call on our production in the years to come, and the kingdom's commitment to maintain a surplus production capacity of 1.5 to 2 million barrels per day. This excess capacity plays a critical role in maintaining the stability of international oil markets and enhancing the energy security of the United States and other global economies. And maintaining that surplus capacity is neither cheap nor easy, but it's vital. Unfortunately, the critical role played by our spare production capability is neither clearly understood nor acknowledged by many. But in times of trouble or turbulence in the petroleum markets, or when production from other sources is impacted by unrest or upheaval, it is primarily Saudi Aramco's ability to tap its production surplus capacity that makes the difference between global economic prosperity and economic peril. While the size and scope of our petroleum infrastructure is vital in ensuring security of supply, the flexibility of that system is just as important. Our individual facilities are designed with numerous backup systems, and the network as a whole is also configured with multiple redundancies. For example, we can export oil not only from the Gulf, but also the Red Sea, thanks to our dedicated export terminals on both coasts and the East-West pipeline system. We also maintain one of the largest fleets of supertankers to enhance our ability to meet our customers' delivery requirements and to maintain our hard-won reputation for reliability. We have always paid tremendous attention to the safety and security of our people and our plants, and will continue to safeguard all of our assets and operations. And to further bolster our reliability, we utilize advanced technology in all aspects of our operations. These tools range from an exploration and petroleum engineering computer center that stores 4 times as much data as NASA handles, and a centralized real-time operations control center to integrate SAP business applications and advanced parallel processing computer systems used to model our giant oil and gas reservoirs. Last, but by no means least, we also invest in our people. We want to ensure that they can handle not only today's sophisticated technology, but have the knowledge, technical know-how, and the spirit of innovation needed to invent, adopt, and adapt tomorrow's technological breakthroughs. The bottom line, in our nearly 7 decades of existence, Saudi Aramco and Aramco, its predecessor, never once failed to meet a supply commitment to one of its customers for operational reasons. Not once. We are proud of that fact. But we also realize that we must maintain that record of reliability in the future. Indeed, given the increased demand for our petroleum and its growing share in the world's total oil supplies, the relationship between Saudi Aramco's operational reliability and the stability and security of the world's energy supply has never been more pronounced. That's a responsibility we acknowledge and a challenge which we are eager to meet, not simply for your benefit or ours, but for the benefit of all. And this is an important concept to grasp, especially since the traditional view of energy security envisaged countries competing for energy resources with an ever-present potential for conflict. This traditional understanding also equated energy and oil imports with dependence and vulnerability. However, I see a growing consensus that such a view is both outdated and unnecessarily pessimistic, and that, as is the case with other commodities and products, international trade in energy can in fact serve as a unifying factor by creating interdependence between producers and consumers. And while consumers need energy to sustain and hopefully raise their standard of living, producers also need markets for their petroleum and depend on export revenues to maintain and enhance the prosperity of their own societies. Candidly speaking, we need you every bit as much as you need us. Far from being a source of vulnerability and dependence, our energy relationship represents a mutual opportunity based on shared interests, which is consistent with the long history of cooperation between the United States and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Our two nations and our two peoples have shared a great deal over the decades. We have stood shoulder to shoulder in times of war and peace, have remained steadfast allies in good times and bad, and have come to depend deeply upon one another. You have helped in the development of our nation and its people, even as we have helped to fuel your economy and provide the energy that has partly contributed to your domestic prosperity. The impact of these ties has been profound, and neither of our societies would be quite the same had our relationship not been so strong or endured for so long. Diplomatic relations are based on national interests. Economic ties are built on commercial considerations, and energy relationships must be grounded in the basic laws of supply and demand and shaped by the forces of the market. These fundamental rules certainly apply to the Saudi-US relationship, but it would be a mistake to imagine that cold eye calculation provides a true measure of that bond. Rather, we must always keep in mind the human aspect of our relationship and the people-to-people contacts that make our relationship so rich and rewarding. We should think of the retired American engineer living in the desert southwest, his house decorated with the cherished Bedouin rugs and jewelry he and his wife collected during their years with Saudi Aramco, who remember just how dazzling the stars are on a night spent camping in the dunes of Saudi Arabian empty quarter. And we have to consider the Saudi refinery manager who wakes up at 3 in the morning his time to tune into his alma mater's ball game and to recall the sights and sounds of Saturday afternoon in the Midwest watching college football. And we must recall the generations of Americans who have worked and raised their families in the kingdom, the tens of thousands of Saudis who have lived and learned here in the United States, and the unique moments that each treasures from his or her experience abroad. Those memories continue to be made today among a new generation, and the relationship between our two peoples will be stronger for them. So, when it comes to the Saudi-American relationship, by all means, let's examine issues of diplomacy and energy and trade. I hope from our discussion today that you will agree that this is an important story to tell and a good story to boot. But let's also celebrate the human dimension of our relationship and remember that we have all been enriched by our interaction, one with the other, partners in prosperity. Thank you very much.
Can you take some questions?
Yeah.
Jum'ah has gracefully accepted to take some questions from the audience. We've got many. I'm sure we don't have that much more time, but one more, a technical one to start out with, Mr. Jum'ah. What are the prospects of Saudi investment in construction of any new U.S. refineries?
Well, His Excellency the Minister last year was making statements about if there are commercial opportunities that would present themselves for us to invest in the U.S., we will do. We do currently have a big investment in Motiva Enterprise with Shell, and we continue to look for opportunities in the U.S. The U.S. is a very important market for us.
You addressed the issue of reserves largely in your remarks, but we received quite a few questions on Saudi reserves and the accuracy of Saudi reserves. What do you think can be done now to provide greater transparency in terms of reserves? And quite a few questions about a native son here, Matt Simmons, and his projections on Saudi reserves. But many questions actually on the reserve situation.
There is absolutely no disagreement between our professionals and other oil and gas professionals pertaining to our reserves. And I think I'll leave it at that.
Now you have become a diplomat. Any thoughts on the development of Saudi gas reserves, perhaps gas to liquids or LNG projects?
You know, we have the world's fourth largest reserves of gas. We are big in gas, and we are big producers of gas. Actually, gas is fueling the Saudi economy today. Our petrochemical industry depends on our gas, our power generation, our water desalination. GTL and LNG we are consuming all the gas we are producing today to fuel the economy. I think with now we have, of course, 4 new companies that are partners with Saudi Aramco looking for gas in the empty quarter. And if we hit a big field somewhere, and I hope we will, then we would have more gas to go into these other schemes. But today, every gas we produce, we consume, actually.
And the role of American companies in the gas contracts? Do you see a role for American companies, a growing role?
Yes, there is a role. There were 4 big tracts that were presented, and companies from all over the world, including American companies, competed for that acreage. But unfortunately, the American companies couldn't compete with the others. We do have one with Shell and Total. We have one with the Sinopec of China. We have one with Eni and Repsol, Eni the Italian and Repsol the Spanish. And we have one with Lukoil. But the Americans were invited, and they competed, but they really didn't make it. But if there is a new, I'm sure, if there is a new offer that the government would make, American companies are well respected in the kingdom. You know, I mean, these are probably the closest to us. And after all, our grandpa is American, after all, you know, when you look at Saudi Aramco.
A more strategic question concerning national oil companies. What do you consider to be the major challenges that are facing national oil companies, and how should they be addressed?
Well, you know, when you say national oil companies, is you look at those that that the ownership is in the hand of the government. You know, so this is the definition. Mm-hmm. But while we consider ourselves a national oil company because of our shareholding, we are not your typical national oil company. You know, we are strictly a commercial company in every respect. I think the only thing that really is probably not commercial in our relationship with the government is the government tells us, you know, what to produce because of their involvement. Otherwise, we run as a national oil company. I'll tell you the biggest challenge that I have in my company. The biggest challenge today is to tap the brain power of our people and to develop it. We are spending a lot of money on human resources. I think you can do everything. If you don't have the right brain power to run your business, you are in trouble. To me, the biggest challenge is I have the reserves, I have the capability to buy technology, I have, you name it. But we need to continue to make our brain power, working for the development of our company. For me, the challenge is really developing human resources.
Human resources. A more political question, last question. How do you see the war on terrorism progressing? A comment that it's obviously made it difficult to hire workers, and where do you see the direction of the war on terrorism progressing in the Middle East?
Well, I would address that question to you.
But that's this is one of the great things about my job. I ask the questions.
No, but terrorism is an international phenomenon. It's not here or there. It's really everywhere. I think we are making a lot of progress, and the world is making a lot of progress. But there are a lot of things that probably agitates terrorists. But I can tell you, in Saudi Arabia, I think the government has done a lot, and I hope they have broken the back of terrorism in Saudi Arabia. I want to tell you one thing. I mean, there is a lot of talk about. We had a few incidents in Saudi Arabia, and there was a talk about the exodus of the expatriate workforce. When you look at it from this side, okay, I mean, you look at it as there is a lot of fear and so on. But the expatriates in Saudi Arabia don't look at it the same way. We have not seen an exodus of people. We still continue to have Americans and other nationalities. We have 50 nationalities working in Saudi Aramco. Although we are 86%, we have 54,000 people, just for the benefit of the people here. 86% are Saudi nationals. But we continue to tap resources from worldwide, including the U.S., and the line to us hasn't stopped. We continue to have people coming, and people live in our communities. But again, the picture from this side is different from the picture from Saudi Arabia. It's not as bad as really reflected either in the press or among people when we talk to them here.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jum'ah. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you.
Very good.
Thank you.
Very good. I asked you a few political diplomatic questions to get you ready for a political position.